Hello, my name is Stephanie and if you're looking for a review on Bunny by Mona Awad, you are definitely in the right place. I actually am going to have to give a little bit of a disclaimer because I haven't read this book in a few months. It's been a while, but it's a review I really wanted to do. It's not super fresh in my head. Other disclaimer, I live in New York City. I am literally 360 surrounded by construction right now. So if you can hear construction, I'm sorry, there's not a lot I can do about it. For my new subscribers, often I will do a book look, a look that goes themed with the book. And sometimes I do an up close and sometimes I explain the theory behind what I did, but really all I did for this book look is went as pink as possible. I would wear pink, but I actually don't own anything that's pink because I feel a little too feminine in pink, so I don't wear pink clothing, but I will wear pink makeup. So because the cover of the book has pink, and just generally when you read the book, it kind of gives you this idea that the girls that you're dealing with in this book are just those classic Barbie doll cult clique girls, you know, like classic Barbie doll tea party type look. I picked up Bunny because in a review I saw on Goodreads, somebody that I follow read it, reviewed it, and they compared it to a Chuck Palahniuk novel, and I love Chuck Palahniuk. He's one of my favorite authors. So really quick synopsis of Bunny by Mona Awad is a kind of like the next cult classic. When I read that this was like a Chuck Palahniuk novel, I absolutely agree with that review. I absolutely agree that it is like a Chuck Palahniuk novel in that sense. I almost feel like it's what the sequel to Damned and Doomed by Chuck Palahniuk would be. So quick synopsis, Samantha Heather Mackey is a student, a scholarship student at a prestigious school where she is going there for, I think it's creative writing specifically, but writing in general is her thing. Poetry is a big element in this book. She is kind of like an outsider. In my head, I imagined her to be a little bit gothic because her writing in the book, she self-describes it, and it is described as a little bit darker and a little bit weirder than what everybody else is producing. It seems like the school she's attending has professors who are kind of trying to pump out the next big novel in the same manufacturing style, but she's kind of going against the grain. She doesn't want to be part of the conveyor belt of manufactured writers, so she kind of sticks to her way of writing, which is not very embraced by her mentors and her peers. So she is kind of like a little bit of an outsider. I wouldn't say she falls quite into the category of not your typical girl, because she's not outwardly trying to be different. She just doesn't understand why her style of writing is not embraced the way that other people's are when writing is such an objective art form. She ends up having a mentor who actually very much wants to nurture her style of writing and wants to see her do well, and she ends up spending the summer spending time with him to develop her writing. That turns into some kind of scandal a little bit later. I'm now realizing last Wednesday when I recorded my last video was an uncommonly quiet day for New York City. In her school, there is a group of girls that refer to each other as Bunny. I think of it very much as like a endearing term or a pet name, kind of like honey or darling or sweetie, those types of things. That's the way in my head that they were using it, and I also did the audiobook, which is the way that the person who was reading the book in the audiobook version was using it, very much like a darling, sweetie, honey kind of way, but they all call each other Bunny. Somehow Samantha gets sucked into this group. They decide to basically adopt her and bring her into their group. And the more that she becomes part of this clique and she's more accepted into the bunnies, the more they reveal to her their mystical ways. I'm gonna link a video from Mona Awad's official YouTube of basically like a advertisement for this book because it's so adorable. I love her. So because she says it, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that these girls reveal to Samantha that what they can do is take bunnies, like the pet, the animal, take these bunnies and turn them into men who will serve their every need and whim, who worship their feet and tell them they're beautiful. And Samantha is sucked into this and trying to learn their ways and how they go about doing this and accomplishing this. And in the process goes through a little bit of self-discovery. There's definitely betrayal. There's really good friendship conflicts in this book. So that's generally what it's about. I don't know if I did a good job selling it, but it's a hoot. So my spoiler-free review of this book is that I absolutely loved it, but that's because it's absolutely my type of book. I've seen a few negative reviews on this book with the whole, like, I didn't know what I was reading, and, like, it was really confusing, and I kind of like that when I get that in a book. I kind of like it when not everything is spelled out for me. Sometimes, you know, it can be nice, especially when you're reading something like fantasy. You need to get that background information in order to understand what they're referring to. You know, nicknames and things like that need to be explained. But in books like this, and in Polinick novels and Murakami novels, I think are like the Japanese version of a Chuck Palahniuk novel, in my opinion. Not everything needs to be explained, and I love that. And you might be confused. And in fact, I was very confused up until like the first third of the book. I had no idea what I was reading. But I'm really well trained in just kind of going with the flow and just having faith that this book will take me somewhere that makes sense eventually. And this book does that thing where, like, as soon as you think you figured out what the book is about and what's going on, it flips it around on you, and then at the very end there is a twist. And I will say I anticipated / predicted that twist, but it wasn't something I was 100% sure was the case. It wasn't obvious, is basically what I'm trying to say. Mona Awad herself describes this book as kind of Carrie meets Heathers, and I would totally agree with that, because it is very much like Heathers, but with a dark twist, like with a little bit of horror sort of aspects mixed in. It is pretty graphic in its descriptions, because there is a little bit of gore. There's a fair amount of gore. I don't want to say there's a lot of gore, but there's a fair amount of gore in there. Which doesn't bother a reader like me. I'm really down for anything. I think what makes cult classics really enjoyable is that there are aspects of, like, young adult / adolescent relationship dynamics mixed into the cult classics. So, like, while you're reading it, you're like, oh my god, I remember when high school or college was like that. Wow, like, you know, that's so true. Or like when you have that first friend breakup or the first friend conflict, and you've never dealt with something like that before. So you're just kind of like, what do? I don't know what the next step is. I tried apologizing. It didn't really work. I don't know what to do. Or like, I'm making friends with people I don't even like. Like, what is that? Why am I doing that? You know, really up until like you're 22 to 25, life is just like a personal experiment. Like, you're just trying to figure out what you want in life, how you get it, how you've ended up with all the things you didn't want, you know? So I think that this book captures that very realistic element, as well as exaggerates it quite a bit, and then adds a little bit of magical realism in there, which is really fun. I think the theme of 2020 is apparently magical realism. When I get a chance to suggest a book for the book club that I'm part of, this is definitely going to be one of them, because it's just a fun read. As long as you don't take it too seriously. Don't go into this book thinking everything is going to be very clear. I would say for me personally, and I'm used to books like this, so maybe I'm being a little generous here, but around a third of the way in, it started to like click and make more sense, and it started to make more of a story than a stream of consciousness, if that makes any sense. So if you're not liking it, I would say stick with it until the first third. It is a book I might recommend you rent from the library, or, you know, do ebook or something like that, because I don't know that this book is for everybody, especially based off of the reviews I've seen of this book, because some people really felt alienated by the book. Like, they didn't know what was going on, they didn't know what was happening, they didn't understand the people. You know, they wanted clear answers as to whether or not magic was happening, or clear answers as to whether or not, like, these girls were a cult, or if they were witches, or if they, you know, like, I know that halfway through the book, more than halfway through the book, I still couldn't tell what these girls were. I went from speculating that they were witches to robots to just plain making things up and maybe, like, drugging Samantha and making her think that these things were actually happening. I had no idea what was going on, but I think that is my favorite place to be in reading in a tactful way. You know, obviously you don't want to just read a book that has no plot, and therefore you have no idea what's going on. This absolutely had a plot, had a story to tell, had a message and a theme, and I think it was masterfully done. I really enjoyed this book. Really, I don't know. I got what I wanted out of it as far as entertainment. For me, like, this is pretty much the exact type of entertainment I like to have from a book and a lot of movies. I do enjoy movies, kind of like Pan's Labyrinth almost, where like, you know, you're kind of like, what is that? That's a monster I've never seen. Why is its eyes in its hands? I don't know the answers to these questions, but you know, I'm gonna go with it because it's pretty and it's fun and, you know, it's emotional, which I would say this book is very emotional. And there are other like kind of subplot lines I haven't discussed in the book. There is kind of an element of sexual discovery for these young women. There's a scandal that is talked about throughout the book. It's kind of a really fun mix of everything. If you really want a good like cult classic, I think this is the next one. I really hope they make it into a movie or a TV show. I wouldn't mind seeing the people who have been directing Sabrina and Riverdale turn this into a Netflix series, because I think that they would capture the correct mood and that their style of directing would actually fit Bunny better than it has fit Riverdale. I think they've been doing Sabrina just so wonderfully. Riverdale, I have problems with. This is not really a review on the book, but Mona Awad, I think, is one of my favorite people. Like, she is just kind of like a soft-spoken, oh my god, this woman could do ASMR easy, like, and make so much money because she's got this very soothing kind of low and slow voice, and she's got a little bit of that adorable creepiness to her in a really gorgeous way. I think she's beautiful. She wrote another book that's really well known, 13 Ways of Looking at a Fat Girl, and then she's written some other smaller bits, but that's her other well-known work. I think that was her debut novel. After reading Bunny, I'm really interested in reading that because I absolutely loved her writing style. I got some quotes. So Samantha, the main character, is talking about this voice in her head, and this is not a spoiler, but it's just a little sample of why the writing is so good. She described the voice in her head as, it's a voice filled with tiny stars with overly lashed cartoon eyes. Would you ever think to describe a voice in your head as something that has overly lashed cartoon eyes? I never did. And I just had there were so many quotes like that where I had to stop and give a little chuckle and smile and write it down. There's no spoilers in this, but there's a part where the girls, the cult, are kind of talking about the bad things that have happened in their lives as a group, you know, kind of like trying to outdo each other, compare to each other's issues, and just kind of talking about the darkest days of their life. And Samantha, in her own monologue, because it is first person, she talks about how it's basically trauma porn. I loved that term because sometimes that's specifically for me, it's been only girls. I'm sure dudes do this too, but I've never personally witnessed it. I don't mean to, you know, single out women here, but in groups of women, I have noticed that it turns into, oh, you think that's bad? I went through this. Like, just this weird culture of comparing our traumas and outdoing each other with trauma. And it's partially why I don't even share mine with people anymore unless I'm on like a one-on-one basis. I'm really pretty much an open book about my past traumas in my life because I've been through a lot and I've confronted it all in therapy, and I'm pretty comfortable talking about almost all of it. But in those big group settings where women are just like, when they actually say, oh, you think that's bad, I've been through this. If you think that's bad, at least you didn't have to go through this, you know? And it does feel like trauma porn. It feels like, oh, like, let me invalidate your experience. Look how much greater my experience was. So don't complain about your life. And that is just not what trauma is. And that term, trauma porn, like, just did it for me. That's exactly what it is. I have experienced this group of women, specifically women personally in my own life. Again, not singling them out. I'm sure that there are men who do this too, but in my personal experience, I've only experienced it with groups of women. That term just hit close to home for somebody who has met people like that and has interacted with people like that. So that just the writing is good, is basically what I'm trying to say with all of this, which is already going to be super long. In fact, I think the non-spoiler part is going to be much longer than the spoiler part. And speaking of, let's go ahead and transition into the spoiler part of this review. So if you have not read the book, go no further, go read the book, come back, and we will discuss in the comments. I think really the biggest thing that I want to say in the spoilery part of this section, and the biggest discussion that I have to give to this, what spoke to me, was the ending, where we realize that Samantha is basically experiencing in her real life her imagination, and almost to almost having a psychotic episode to the point where she believes everything has been real. And you know what? Like, I actually have like a little bit of a conspiracy theory that maybe everything was real, and then maybe everybody else was in on it, and they're just kind of like now gaslighting her. Maybe like if it's a huge conspiracy, but like this whole idea that she was so going through such a hard time and really having a hard time internalizing her external experiences, that she then turned her imagination into real life and her real life experiences, even though they were causing her more trauma than they were solutions. Like, I can relate to that so hard, because my imagination gets so strong that when I'm laying in bed and thinking about an alternative ending to a movie or a book or a TV show, or if I'm trying to think about a story that I'm writing and the challenges that character will go through, or what they have gone through, maybe even parts of this character I won't end up writing, but just to give them backstory and character, I will like just lay in bed before sleep and think about the trauma that character has been through, which has brought them to where they are, and I will start crying, or I will just get angry. And like, or sometimes when I'm doing it while I'm crocheting or while I'm watching a TV show. I'm not even paying attention to what I'm watching, I'm just thinking about these things, and my boyfriend will try to talk to me, and I'll be like just pissed off. And I'm pissed off because I'm angry for the character in my head. You know, so for me, my imagination heavily affects my reality, and I take on the emotions of what's happening in my imagination. And I have to be very aware of that, because I'm just a highly, highly creative, imaginative person, and I love that about myself. I think it is one of my greatest gifts in this world, and it has really helped me through a lot, really helped me process a lot of feelings. Before my mom passed away, for like 2 years when she was really sick, before she died, I was going through every single possible future I could have without her. Like, she dies and this is what happens, and I would cry and I would get angry, or I would fall in love. I would fall in love with made-up people in my head. Like, not like falling in love with a character, but like just I would go through entire scenarios where I fall in love with this man that I have made up in my head, who I meet, who understands me or something, you know, like understands my trauma, understands what it's like to have a sick parent kind of thing. And like, I would feel love. I would feel loved. Like, the emotions from what was going on in my head would be very real in my heart, which sounds like a mental disorder, but I swear I've talked about this with my therapist and stuff. It was a coping mechanism, and it was my way of processing things in a way that made me feel safe. I feel like that's exactly what Samantha was going through. Like, this is an actual thing people do. And for some people who are very mentally unstable or have like maybe a personality or mood disorder, they might actually go through psychosis. They might have a manic moment or a manic episode where they actually think that the things that are happening in their head are happening in real life. I've never had that. I never actually thought these things are happening in real life. It was just the process through which I would imagine it. I felt in my emotions, not truly believed were happening in real life. So I'm not sure if she had some kind of psychotic event or manic episode in relation to maybe some kind of mental disorder she might have. I know even with things like major depression, you can have a manic episode like this and just have this moment of just believing what you're feeling, and then seeing it happen with your eyes. So I kind of, based off of my own experience, of my own imagination, toward the end, I would say a little bit after halfway through, started thinking, I wonder if this is all happening in her head. Not in like a gaslighting kind of way, but in an actual, like, she believes this is happening, but maybe it's not really happening. Because it sounded like she had gone through a fair amount of emotional trauma in her life. I wouldn't be surprised if this was also her coping mechanism for how she would internalize everything that was happening around her. So I kind of love, and like a couple of reviewers were like, oh, it's such a cop-out, but I kind of love at the end where they're telling her, like, honey, that never happened. Like, what are you talking about? Bunnies turning into men. Like, So for me, I think because of my unique upbringing and experience with mental health and imagination. This book spoke personally to me. It feels like this book really spoke to an actual experience in my life that I've had that not many people can relate to. I experience things in such a different way than everybody else does that this book made me feel validated and seen, and like I just appreciate Awad for that. I think the world needs a new cult classic. I think that the last like major one we've had was Mean Girls. I just feel like we are due for one, and I think this is it, and I think this could be a really, really good screenplay. I think Netflix could probably do something really cool with it, with the access they have to all of the amazing directors they have. I almost feel like this could be turned into some form of Black Mirror episode. I would love to see that happen. I just love this idea of these, like, I don't even know what to call them. My battery died, so we might have a different angle. But yeah, I like the idea that they are just these girls who are proper and clean and wear their prom necklaces and are having their magical Barbie tea party, and then they're also, you know, turning bunnies into men and then murdering them in like really awful ways when they start getting defective. I don't know. When the men start getting a little too obsessed with the women, when they just need to be put down, like, you know, just that kind of gore. I think that's something that has been missing from like cult classic. I think I love that this is almost a cult classic horror genre, which I think has been done before and done pretty well, but I also feel like this is done in more of the style of cult classic with a little bit of horror, instead of a horror film that is trying to embody the idea of like the cult classic genre. Because I do love the like weird mixture of like, I don't know, this kind of reminds me of Get Out a little bit, with like where like you're just in this world where everybody's acting like something completely ludicrous is totally normal. I feel like that speaks to me. Maybe that's why I love these books where like nothing makes sense, because many times in my life I have been in a situation where I'm like, why is everybody acting like this is normal and okay? I think that's why those types of books, and this book specifically, speak to me. It almost feels like a natural state of being for me to be completely confused and not understanding why everybody else thinks that this weird thing that's happening is completely normal and okay. Like we're talking about it like it's not a problem. A lot of my life has been like that. So again, we're going back to how this book validates my life personally. I think I talked about everything else that I really wanted to talk about in the spoiler-free section, because really, more than talking about the book itself, I think for me what made this book so good is how it validated my whole life experience, and also just the writing, how amazing the writing was, and how it's exactly up my alley and exactly what kind of book it is. I would love for people to pick up this book, but I really don't know how to sell it to people when I'm like, yeah, it's great. You have no idea what's going on most of the time. You're not sure what's real and what isn't. They don't really explain it. You kind of get an ending that sort of explains what's happening, but does that invalidate the rest of the experiences that happened in the book? Like, who knows? Like, I don't know. You have to answer that for yourself. Oh no, you have to do actual work and mental work and answer questions for yourself that a book raises in real life. Oh no, I feel so bad for you. Sometimes I even feel like the people who are praising the book didn't get the point, but then again, who am I to say that that was the point to get out of the book? But to me, the point is that people and women can be horrible to other women, and that the coping mechanisms, whatever they may be, that you need to deal with it, can be a little extreme. But that is the position we're put in these days, is that you need extreme means to deal with extreme circumstances to cope. I think also the point of the book is that damn, women need to be more supportive and nicer to each other. I don't know. I think that's really all I have to say about the book. I'm sorry this review was less about the book and more about me, but you know, it is my channel and these are my book reviews and this is how I function. This is how I relate to books. And really that's what I really tried to set the expectation that's what would, like, my reviews would be, is more of like, this is how the book affected me and related to me. And so this felt a little self-indulgent, but really I decided to make this video today because I wanted to be a little self-indulgent, because I love this book and I think everyone should read it. But then again, I don't think that everyone's gonna like it. So I feel like you should read it even if you feel like you won't like it. And even if you don't like it, that's okay, because at least you read it. I hope that you guys also enjoyed this book. If you didn't enjoy this book, feel free to share why. I won't take it too personally, or at least even if I do take it personally, I will acknowledge that I'm irrationally taking it personally. So feel free to share any and all opinions about this book down in the comments if you got this far into the review. Thank you for sticking around, and until next Wednesday, I will definitely see you later. Bye.